Today's episode of the Stallside Podcast was brought to you by Rood and Riddle Veterinary Pharmacy. Joining me today, Dr. Steve Reed. How are you today, Steve?
Oh, I'm great, Bart. Thanks for inviting me.
Hey, you've put this together for us, and I'm really excited about it. We're going to do a 3-part series, equine neurology, and we have some of the best neurologists in the country joining us, and I'm real excited about it. Who's our first guest today?
So the first guest that we had today was Dr. Tom Divers, and Tom, he's a really, really interesting and exciting guy. And he teaches at, he's now an emeritus faculty at Cornell University. And he's an individual who has done so much in not only neurology, but in particular for foals, but he's done a lot of work on metabolic disorders that have led to neurologic problems, including a better understanding of all the liver viruses and the things that secondary to hepatic disease where you get a lot of encephalopathy.
Okay, and I think we're gonna get into that and some of his work in Theiler's disease, and I'm really interested to hear about that. So I'm excited to have him. So on the show today, Dr. Tom Divers from Cornell University going to be here with us. Part 1 of 3. Dr. Divers, thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate you taking time to be with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm happy to do it, and always happy to do stuff with Steve.
Yeah, we're thrilled to have Dr. Reed in the studio with us today. Fabulous.
I'm excited to be here.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm a native from Southwest Virginia. I went to undergraduate school. I grew up on a farm, a dairy farm, and that's where I got my first introduction to veterinary medicine. The veterinarian who worked on our cattle was Cornell graduate. And not only is he a good veterinarian, but he was a well-recognized individual in the community, too. And he did a lot of community things. And, I always got along. He always have time for me, too. He would always tell me a few stories, and I like stories. And he would tell me a few stories and about his life and things like that. And so I got to know him and interest, and I went to undergraduates at Virginia Tech, VPI in those days, in Blacksburg, and I actually majored in dairy science. I thought I might go back to the dairy farm, but I was also interested in athletics and coaching and things. And, I just had veterinary medicine kind of on my back burner through the experience on the farm and Dr. Lawrence, who was a veterinarian on the farm. And then as I went through my sophomore year and junior year, I thought, well, maybe I'll apply to veterinary school. And so I did, not knowing whether I'd get in, because I wasn't the most studious type. Let's put it that way. I was up for fun and hard work, but didn't study it all that hard. My grades were only average, and so never thought about it. Well, if I don't get in, that's fine. I'll either go back to the farm and, teach and coach and stuff like that was my philosophy on it. But as it turns out, I was surprised. I interviewed at the University of Georgia, and I didn't get in, but I was on an alternate list. And so suddenly I get a letter saying there had been an opening. And I was like, oh, okay, that's cool. I guess I better go to veterinary school now. So unfortunately, though, I left a letter laying around. And my roommate said, weren't you supposed to let them know by a certain date? And I said, oh, my gosh, yes, because I already told everybody I was going to veterinary school. And now all of a sudden, I looked at it, and that was the date I had to let them know, the day he reminded me. So I called them, not knowing if they would even accept that, in those days. And they said, oh, yeah, that's fine. So I snuck into veterinary school, basically. And once I got there, I wasn't very good because I'd never studied really religiously in my life at that point. And I realized that you had to really study hard in the veterinary school. And it took me, first semester I did fairly poor. But then after that, I picked it up and did quite well. And I got really interested in equine my senior year. And a lot of that has to do with, and I'd like to, acknowledge some people. One of the interns when I was a senior student was a veterinarian who became very famous here, Dr. Doug Byers. Mm-hmm. And he basically founded the Haggard's internal medicine facility there. And I worked with him one spring before that was built. And so he told me, you need to do an internship. And I was like, oh, no, I think I'm just going to go home and do, because I like dairy cattle too. and do a dairy cattle, maybe equine practice back in Southwest Virginia. He said, no, you need to go do an internship. So he was pretty convinced me. And in those days, there was no match or anything. You just sent your letter in and, I'd like to apply and so forth. And of course, I got in probably because of him, because he had been a graduate of UC Davis. And I'm sure he probably called him. But they called me one day and say, hey, we picked you for an intern. And that's when things really took off. So I went to Davis, and the reason I was excited to go because I knew they did a lot of dairy cattle research too. And I said, oh, this is perfect. I can do horses and catch up on some of the dairy cattle aspects too to improve what that's, still wanted to do a lot of dairy cattle practice. I got there and I found out that their work in dairy cattle was pure research. So everything I did as an intern was equine.
Gotcha.
Basically.
Yeah.
And they had great equine people there. Great equine people, Gary Carlson, Humphrey Knight, Brad Smith, Alex Ardans. I learned so much. But I felt pretty good because our caseload at University of Georgia wasn't huge in equine. And so I did a lot of small animal stuff too. And that was an advantage I actually had because some of the other interns had focused on equine really early on in their veterinary academic career there. And so there's a lot to be learned from small animal medicine. Some of the techniques and advances are greater than in small animal than they were in equine. So it worked out really well for me. And let me think from there, when I finished the internship, they had asked me to stay on as a resident, but driving on the fields and the roads today, see the colors in Southwest Virginia is very similar.
Yeah.
I love Davis, but the only thing I didn't like, no seasonal change there. I just missed the mountains and things. So I said, no, I'll go back. And I didn't really have an idea of what I was going to do. I had asked, and don't want to go on too long, but I'd asked Dr. Knight, who was the head of equine medicine then. I said, I've learned so much from you and your colleagues this year as an intern. I said, surely there's somebody in this country that knows as much about dairy cows as you folks do and know about equine internal medicine. And he immediately said, Bob Whitlock at Cornell University. And so then I got in touch with Whitlock to see if I could do a residency at Cornell University. And it turns out he was actually moving, I didn't know this, to the University of Georgia, where I just graduated from. And so he says, well, let me get to Georgia and see what's going on. And so I was, kind of unemployed for about 2 or 3 months. I was actually headed to Wisconsin for a dairy practice. And halfway along the way, I got a phone call from the University of Georgia. My mother had relayed the call that they wanted to talk to me. And I was like, okay. So I called there and they said, well, we'd like for you to come for a residency. So I turned around in Pennsylvania, somewhere like that, heading for a dairy practice, and went back to Athens, did a residency in internal medicine. And after I finished that, they asked me to stay on. I liked the teaching aspects of it. And I said, well, I'll stay, because this is where it circles again. Because they wanted me to do internal medicine in the hospital and ambulatory. Well, I said, I will stay if you all will hire a friend of mine who's really, really good to move in and also help with this program, equine, internal medicine, ambulatory, both. And that was Doug Byers, who had sent me to UC Davis. And he had left Georgia as an intern and gone to work in a polo practice in Florida. And I knew he kind of wanted to get out of that. So they said, yeah. So it all worked out. So Doug Byers came, Bob Whitlock was there. I was in heaven, having a good time, back to the University of Georgia. And I was on faculty then for a couple of years there at the University of Georgia. And Dr. Whitlock left and went to Pennsylvania. And then so he kind of drugged me up to Pennsylvania to join the faculty there. And about that same time, Doug left and came here and started the Haggard's internal medicine program at that same time. Doug Byers had. And I was at New Bolton Center, which I loved. I've loved every place I've worked. Hard to call it work even. I've liked it so much. And after being 10 years at Pennsylvania, I still had that little bit of desire to do more dairy cattle work, because the UPenn, it was, almost all equine.
Yeah.
And so that's because I loved all the people there and everything. A lot of excitement there at the New Bolton Center. But I decided to move to Cornell because they had a better mixture of dairy cows and equine. So I moved there. Now, that's not true anymore. So I moved there and been there for almost 35 years now. And I retired officially 2 years ago. They hired me back to consult on cases and finish up some of my research. And that's where I stand today. I've enjoyed the teaching. I've enjoyed the research. I've enjoyed the clinical work. It's been mostly equine with a little dairy cattle mixed in. That's it.
Well, what a story. You know, as listening to you, there's so many different things that happened that would have totally changed the trajectory of your life.
You got it. And almost by accident.
And it's interesting how many people have sat in that chair who have told us that a cattle vet had a huge influence on them becoming a veterinarian.
Yeah,
that's including me.
Yeah,
that's right. That comment.
Yeah, I learned that today about Steve. Yeah.
Yeah, but anyway, well, you know, there are a couple of things that you didn't share in there yet. I know you got a really special wife, Nita Irby, and you might, you know, she's also a veterinarian, and you know, and then you got children. And why don't you just share just a little bit more before we go totally down the path of talking about your academic career?
Yeah, good. I prefer talking about other people than myself. I'd rather talk about my wife, Doug Byers, Bob Whitlock, those type things, and Lyle George too. At the University of Georgia. He was great to work with. And I'm married veterinarian. I met her at the University of Georgia. And shortly after we were together, there came a time that we almost had to physically split up because I was doing my thing with internal medicine, large animal, and she was a recent graduate, and she wanted to kind of specialize too, and she was much smarter than me, and she got an internship wherever she wanted to, and she got one at Cornell, as it turned out, circle again, and that was kind of one of the preferred places to go then was Cornell. So she went to Cornell. We were apart for that 1 year, physically apart, and then after that, she got a residency at the University of Pennsylvania in ophthalmology, and Whitlock was there, who had moved from Georgia, and he was like pulling me towards Pennsylvania, so it kind of worked out. She came to Pennsylvania from Cornell to do her ophthalmology residency. I went from Georgia to Pennsylvania as a faculty member at New Bolton Center, and she got board certified in ophthalmology there, and she continued to do small animal, and then she moved to New Bolton Center. The 10 years we were in Pennsylvania, she was at New Bolton Center doing only equine for about the last 5 parts. So she became an equine specialist ophthalmologist and was a really, really good one too. And in the meantime, we had 2 kids, Bob and Shannon. Shannon was the oldest, and I still see her. She's my biking partner, her and her husband. We do a lot of biking together and a lot of football games. I'm a big University of Georgia football fan. I will say that now. And, you know, they're probably going to lose some more this year. But anyway, I'm a fan. And Shannon went to Cornell. And she had been to Georgia with me once for one of my reunions. And somewhere along the way, her husband went to the University of North Carolina. And they have a business together there in Ithaca. And have done well. But somewhere along the way, she called me one Saturday afternoon. I was working at the vet school, and she said, "Dad, what's wrong with them?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" She said, "I'm watching the Georgia game, and they're playing terrible." I said, and I found out then that over the next couple of years, both her and her husband, neither one of which went to University of Georgia, became huge University of Georgia fans, football fans. And now we go to games together and things and have fun.
Gotcha, that's
a lot
great.
of athletics and stuff. And then I have a son, Bob, who was a really good athlete in school. He was a really elite swimmer, but he had shoulder surgery. He was a good, made really good grades, a really smart kid. Both his shoulders operated on, but he still was a pretty good swimmer. He could only do freestyle. And he went to Middlebury College up in Vermont and swam there. And after he finished that, he didn't know what he was going to do. But he had a friend who was Chinese, who was he swam with, who was a real smart kid who went to MIT. And somewhere along the way, he just told us one night, like, "I think I'm going to go to China to work." And we were like, "Oh, yeah? Okay." And he had been looking at stuff, and he found out because he enjoyed foreign languages and a little bit teaching and stuff like that when he's at Middlebury. turns out he had found a job as a guidance counselor at a English-speaking private school in Shenzhen, China. And so off he is to China. We didn't know we'd see him again.
That's a big move.
Yeah, it's a huge move, especially for a kid that age with no experience with a lot of stuff. And he met a Chinese lady there who had been to school and went to college in Canada at Fraser College. They got married, still living in China. He's left his job as a guidance counselor, and they have a private company now there that they were an educational company. So we see him once a year, and I see my daughter almost every day.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, that's my family.
Okay, well, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. No.
You know, Tom, I know a lot about you because I've had opportunity to be on multiple meetings with you. In fact, we just came back from Liverpool. We spoke at the British Equine veterinary meeting, and in all of those meetings, you've always been very complimentary of everybody who's helped lead and train you or been your colleagues on research. And three people that you've named, Bud Tennant, John Cummins, Doug Byers, and of course Delahunta, have all been individuals that have had an impact on you and you on them. And I guess I'd like to hear a little bit about, many of us have heard of Theiler's disease for so long. We all know about it, but it wasn't until Dr. Tennant and you did a lot of really, really heavy-duty research. Could you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I'll be happy to, because I like talking about Dr. Tennant, too, who's passed away, unfortunately. But even when I was at New Bolton Center and he was at Cornell, he's a UC Davis grad. He spent a lot of time at Cornell, and he actually developed a woodchuck model for human hepatitis B, and even for C, they used this. So every drug that's on the market right now for either one of those two diseases for humans went through his lab. And that's how he was a big researcher. And he was actually originally a equine veterinarian. And then research pulled him so hard he gave up the clinics and things. But even when I was at New Bolton Center and he was at Cornell, we used to chat times like, we ought to be able to figure this out. This might be a viral infection, because no one knew at that time. And then somewhere back in 2015, when I was obviously at Cornell at that time, or 2014, there was an outbreak out in Nevada. And we were like, okay, we probably should go look at this, rather than just talk about it. So we just got on the plane and we went out there to talk to the veterinarian at the farm, and we got samples and things like that. And at that time, of course, Dr. Tennant had a lot of, contacts with the human field. And this metagenomics process where you just get the DNA from the blood and you sort out the horse DNA, and then you start looking at what else might be in the blood. It's basically a simplified, explanation of it. That had just become available, and there was a drug company in San Francisco that Dr. Kennedy worked for, and they had just set up this called metagenomics. So we, got some samples. We tested those horses. We went on, we collected some more samples later on and tested them at Columbia University. And it was actually at Columbia that we found a new virus at the University of Columbia from the horses. And they could sequence it and they could tell which family is in and things like that. And so then we did a study to find out in natural cases how many of them were positive to this virus, and all of them were. So we had, as best we could, kind of completed Koch's postulate to prove that. And what did it do for the industry? It gave information that the USDA then required all the blood products used in horses to be tested for this, because some of the big outbreaks were associated with blood transmission. The original description of Theiler is a veterinarian from South Africa, and they had given antiserum made from horses to horses to protect them against African horse sickness virus. And it worked. But about 4 to 10 weeks later, a lot of those horses came down with hepatitis. And the same thing happened to the U.S. soldiers in World War II with yellow fever vaccination. And they had made a yellow fever vaccine. They had put human serum in it and vaccinated the soldiers, and it worked to get protection for yellow fever. But same thing, About 4 to 8 weeks later, a lot of soldiers came down with hepatitis. Now, that proved to be hepatitis B. It took them 20 years to prove that after that fact. And so, it's the Theiler's disease. We still have it around because we don't know how it's transmitted other than intended blood inoculation. And we just had a big outbreak in North Carolina where 7 horses died and there was no injections given. So there's got to be some fly transmission or a transmission from horse to horse to the carriers. So there's still work to be done on that. There's always more work to be done. So that's a story.
That's a good one on the hepatic viruses. And just share a little bit more about one of the viruses in horse has a huge impact on hepatitis C, right, in people.
Yeah, we're still investigating that one. I got to give Joy Tomlinson, who was our graduate student, Dr. Tennant and I, the best thing we ever did, Dr. Tennant and I brought Joy Tomlinson in because she is really smart. And she has new ideas and things like that. So the one virus we kind of sorted out was causing the Theiler's disease. But then there was a second virus that along the way was discovered with metagenomics, and it's very similar. It's the closest virus known to human hepatitis C. And originally, and we did some projects there with Dr. Tennant's help, and we actually did a transfection. I don't know that it's the first transfection study ever done in equine medicine, but it might be. I don't know, it's number one. But basically, these viruses are very hard to culture. But the group over at Rockefeller University in Columbia, they were helping us, and one of those people wound up winning the Nobel Prize in 2022, was a Nobel Prize winner for medicine. And they helped us a lot. We couldn't do all this by ourselves, but they were able to take parts of the virus, since we couldn't grow it, pieces of it, and send those to us. And we just stuck those pieces of virus into the liver of a horse, and we created the infection and so forth. That's called a transfection study. And it may have been the first one in equine medicine.
But it's pretty impressive for all of us to be super proud of being veterinarians, but to know that this whole concept of One Health, it's for real.
Yeah.
It's absolutely for real. And to know that you must be really proud to know that you had an impact on helping solve things that are really important in human medicine. So pretty exciting.
That's true. I am excited about it, as you can tell, but I always tell people, and this is honest truth, I couldn't have done any of that by myself, none of it, because I'm not smart enough. I don't have the training to do it. So I always tell people my favorite research is when it's clinical. You can apply it to the horse. When it's collaborative, and that's the only way I could get research done, was having these bright minds, all together. And then it's great if it's comparative, because if it's comparative, it has direct implications for human medicine, which these did, and also motor neuron disease. It's easier to get money for the research when it's that. So clinical, collaborative, and comparative. But the comparative, I was just lucky to get to work with so many great people. I mean, it's just luck.
Well, and you led us right down the path of where I wanted to go next, and that was to talk about a disease that came and has been almost eradicated.
Yeah.
And the work that you and John Cummins did in looking at equine motor neuron disease, which is similar, but sadly didn't turn out to be the model for Lou Gehrig's disease or, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. But still, a lot of information was gained about what is a really, really serious and important problem in people, even though it didn't turn out to be the model they had hoped. But share a little bit about the things that you did, and just even a little bit of the anecdotal story about how many horses came, how you might have sorted out what could be the problem, and I'll lead it there.
Well, this was a new disease, and it was very similar to ALS, or motor neuron disease, in people. As a matter of fact, even to today, it's the only naturally occurring somewhat model for it. Naturally occurring in animals. It's still to today only one. Of course, they could do mice, mutations and stuff and reproduce it now. But naturally occurring in a horse is still the only model that fits a little bit like that. And so a new disease, we had a great team. John Cummins, that really deserves the credit. He was a neuropathologist. He wasn't a clinician at all. He taught histology at Cornell. He had worked at Walter Reed with his PhD on organophosphate toxicity, causing neurologic problems. and extremely brilliant, modest, incredible individual. I mean, and he knew everything, sports, geology, I mean, everything he knew. And he's so humble, too. He was so humble, let's think about him. But anyway, he probably deserves most of the credit. And then, of course, we had probably the most famous veterinary neurologist in history of veterinary medicine, Dr. Alexander Delahunty. And he was doing a lot of the postmortems for us and helping with the clinical exams and things. Then we had an epidemiologist, Dr. Husni Muhammad. Then we happened to be lucky and had probably the most famous equine nutritionist there, Skip Hentz was there. And he came in later because what happened is, and I give Dr. Cummins, the non-clinician in this group, the credit for this. When we started seeing cases and hear about cases, no matter where they were, Cummins, with all his duties, teaching histology stuff, we need to go see. We got to get our credibility with veterinarians up to know that we're really interested in this disease and include the referred veterinarians and make sure they're part of the team. And he really, pushed that on us, which was a great idea. It makes common sense. So many times we would hear about a case in Boston, in the city, in the suburbs, and we would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, 4:30. We'd drive all the way to Boston, meet the veterinarian, look at the case, take samples, drive all the way home the same day. It was somewhat dangerous because, number one, some of those mornings in Ithaca we left, the temperature was like minus 25, actual temperature, not wind chill, when we left in the morning in the winter. And on the way back, there were some times we almost ran off the road. Everybody was sleepy and so forth. But then after doing all these, going to these farms, we realized we'd get to another farm and we'd look around like, we've been here before, because they looked the same. The horses had no pasture. They were urban areas, most of them were. In the Northeast, the hay is not very green. And so finally we said, could this be a vitamin E deficiency? And Dr. Cummins, with his knowledge, and he was an electron microscopist too, he had done some work looking at the brain and the eyes on these horses. And he had picked up this, what's called lipofuscin, which is oxidative damage to any kind of lipid membrane or anything. And he felt like it was probably an oxidative disorder. So the lack of pasture, green grass, green hay, the evidence that he had there was an oxidative disorder, we were like, could it be vitamin E deficiency? So then we started checking that, and it fit with all the horses, vitamin E deficiency. And so then we reproduced it. We didn't think we'd be able to do it. We figured it was more complex than that because the human disease certainly is more complex. And so we, got research horses, and we started to try to reproduce it with a low vitamin E but normal energy diet. And it took 18 months, but we started having our first case. And unfortunately, Dr. Cummins passed away. He would have been so excited to know that we actually reproduced that disease. So then, it was a relatively common disease around the world. I mean, went to Brazil, in Sao Paulo, they almost had an outbreak of motor neuron disease because the horses there had no pasture. These were police horses that patrolled the streets. We went down there and got samples. We brought their people up to Cornell to teach them how to collect the right samples and so forth. We went to Switzerland to look at horses. We went to Ireland to look at horses. We traveled all over finding these horses. We didn't go to Japan, but they had a lot of cases in Japan. And so to make a really long story short, we confirmed that it's a vitamin E deficiency, it's oxidative disorder. And so then everybody started feeding vitamin E. And the important thing is if you don't have pasture, if you don't have green hay, don't depend on the vitamin E that's in the grain because it's not very well absorbed. And so then it introduced a new industry of almost new vitamin E, which was better absorbed. And now we have 2 or 3 products on the market. People know to supplement those horses. We used to see at Cornell 5, 6 cases every year, and they wound up dying. Most of them did. And now we rarely see disease, which is the best part of the research, is when you can actually not totally eradicate, but mostly eradicate a disease.
So what year did you start working on that?
That would have been 1990.
1990.
91.
Yeah, so I graduated veterinary school in 98, and it's not something that we deal with, really.
Right.
No.
That's right. It's just, and we had some cases at Ohio State, and that whole idea that the horses that are kept on dry lots that don't have access to really good quality green hay, and that's something that's really important about the alfalfa. It needs to be green.
Exactly.
And or just giving them grass. And I thought that you guys took a lot of donations in, and when you turned them out on pastures, some of them kind of improved, right?
They did.
That was something you noticed.
And that was different from the human model. And I think we kind of figured that out too, because the motor neurons, they don't just go from normal to dead overnight. So there's a group that are already dead, there's a group that are normal, and it's a group that are diseased. And we think that when we intervene with that disease group, can't do anything about the dead ones, the normal ones, okay, but that disease group, that's where the intervention works. And so some of the horses do improve quite a bit, and so not all the horses die, whereas the human model is still progressive. I think the only thing we contributed there, to be honest with you, collaborative, because we did have good funding from the NIH for this project, because it was the only animal model for human motor neuron disease. And I still used to get letters from spouses where their other spouse had motor neuron disease.
Such a sad disease.
And they were searching for any kind of clue.
Absolutely.
Any kind of clue. They were just searching. I'd get letters and so forth. But the only thing we really contributed was the vitamin E. And in fact, it was an oxidative disorder. And at that time, people didn't know that in human medicine. But now it's pretty well accepted that the human disease is oxidative, but it's just more complex than is the equine disease. And so we were able to pretty much figure out the equine, but the human one is still difficult. Can I tell another quick story?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I learned a lot, too, about our government, and I don't want to be critical of our government, but we were invited down to NIH, so I shouldn't say anything bad about it. We went down and presented all this data, the clinical data, the electron microscopy, the epidemiology, told them what we found on horses, and told them we were pretty sure it was an oxidative disorder. And they were nice. They listened to us, but we met with them. And most of them were like, yeah, but we're pretty sure it's a retrovirus infection. And so retrovirus was really popular at that time, 1990. And so what the NIH apparently had done, don't get me in trouble here, they're going to probably arrest me tomorrow.
Hey, this is going to be out there on social media.
It appears what they had done, they surrounded themselves with retrovirologists, thinking that was what the answer was. Didn't turn out to be the answer. Now, we don't have the answer for the human disease, too, but we did determine it was an oxidative disorder.
You might not have put the whole puzzle together, but you gave them a couple pieces, right?
Yeah, well, I hope we did.
So a couple key pieces. That's fabulous.
Yeah, but they ran with it, and,
So, Tom, do you miss cattle?
Yeah, I do, and I love dairy cows and show cows particularly. And I'm still doing some work on that, too. I was invited to the embryo transfer meeting last November about this time. It was the same weekend as the Georgia-Florida football game. And luckily, the meeting was in Orlando. So I called them and I said, well, if I come, can I go from Orlando to Jacksonville? And, the schedule work out. And they said, yeah. So the reason is I still, there's a syndrome in IVF case, in vitro fertilization, where they have a lot of anomalies at birth, mostly cardiopulmonary anomalies. And so we've been trying to work on that. And we have a little article coming out on that. We haven't solved it yet, but it's a problem. And but I've always I showed cattle when I was a kid. And I've always kind of followed the show cows, and I've been able to work on some really nice ones, I get really excited about that when I have a chance to do that.
Well, we're glad you worked on horses.
Yeah, that's for sure.
You can be nostalgic about the cows.
Most of my work, 90% of my work has been equine, but I love that 10% when it's a good dairy cow.
Well, what I've seen here, though, with this conversation is, you started about telling us about an ordinary kid from Virginia.
Very ordinary.
Who's gone on and done some extraordinary things. And
with help.
Absolutely. But curiosity was a big key part of that. And you talk about packing up and, going across the globe to look at these horses and putting things together that maybe those of us on the ground don't see, because you notice some things, some links between some of these cases that we wouldn't notice because we're right up in front of it.
Right. Yeah.
It's exciting. It's exciting to have an opportunity to be on many programs with you, and and I hear a lot from Cornell graduates and residents that you've helped train, how impactful you were on their career. So that's got to be another thing. And recently, when you and I had breakfast in Liverpool with your wife Nita, it became very obvious that former Cornell students gravitated to both of you, you and Nita, and the impact that you have, and that has to make you really proud to know that, okay, I started as a farm kid, and here I am having an opportunity to help other kids who might also be farm kids, but to turn into, productive, veterinarians who really do things to help solve life problems.
Yeah, I've always enjoyed teaching. That's probably the main reason I stayed in the university system, is because I enjoyed the teaching. And the research came along later just by accident, to be honest with you. And I love the clinical work either way, private practice or in university. But yeah, I enjoy it. And the residents are special too. They're almost like family members to each one. I saw, I think, 5 of them at this meeting here. The small meeting we had of 30 couple people.
When you trained 5 of those people in there?
Yeah, at least 5. Maybe even 6 were here. Yeah.
And we didn't even hear any stories about you hanging out with Wayne, the guy in Las Vegas.
Wayne Newton.
Wayne Newton. Why couldn't I think? They hang out with. He hung out with Wayne Newton. Gets seats in the front row.
Yeah,
he could still get seats in the front row today if he wanted to.
Oh, I don't know about that, but it's just one of those accidents that happened when I was an intern at Davis. He needed some help on his farm in Las Vegas, and I had some vacation time, and actually 2 of us went down. Irwin Lou. Irwin Lou and I went down, and we spent about 2 weeks down on the farm in Las Vegas. So we got to know him pretty well, and he came up every night, and we chatted. And he's from close to where I grew up, because he told me the first night he came, he goes to work about 4 in the afternoon for his evening shows and stuff, and he came by to say hi to us, and and I started chatting with him and so forth. And he's like, I'm probably not going to be able to talk to you very much. And I was like, oh boy, what did I do wrong? And he said, and then he told me that I didn't know he actually grew up in Roanoke, Virginia. And he says, with my accent I have, he said, if I start hanging around with you too much, I'll revert back. That's a true story. But no, we saw him every day, and he invites to shows. He took us up to Lake Tahoe later in the year. And then last year he was close by having a concert. He's 80 years old now, and I think it was called Wayne Newton Up Close and Personal. And I told my wife, I said, I haven't been in touch with him in years. And he had a horse die of Theiler's disease. And that's really why I wanted to get in touch with him. I tried to send him our publication, but I couldn't find an address to send it to him. And I couldn't, get in touch with his agent. So I told my wife, I said, I'm going to try to get in touch with Wayne, because I'd love to tell him that we've solved the problem. Because he had the most valuable Arabian stallion in maybe the world at that time. And it died of serum hepatitis, Theiler's disease. And I think his name was Aramis was his name. And so I wanted to let him know that we had done this work and so forth. I thought he'd be at least interested and even pleased. And so I sent a message to his agent, not knowing if it even went through. Didn't hear anything from him. And this was last August, a year ago. And I was out in the yard working, and I think my wife, Nita, got in touch with him and said, Wayne Newton's wife's on a phone for you. So it was afternoon before the concert. So I picked it up, Kathleen's her name, and said, hi, thanks for calling. She said, will you come to the concert? I said, no, I didn't hear back. Said, and so forth. So said, well, we got tickets for you if you want to come. So we went down. It was great because, the great part about it is I was able, 2 things. Number 1, I was able to show him the work that we had done. And number 2, I was able to find out of a name of a person. And this you'll find interesting too. Steve, I think, gets bored of my stories.
No, I love your story, Tom.
But when we worked on his little small property there in Las Vegas, he had a big farm up north. But he had these favorite horses there, and he brought mares down to foal out, and he had some horses that Olivia Newton-John people rode all the time, kept there. But anyway, there's an older fellow there, and that took care of the horses just on that smaller farm. Shenandoah is called, right in Las Vegas. And this old fellow, we spent a lot of time with him because he lived there basically and took care of the few horses on that property. And I forgot his name and all that stuff, but I knew what he had done as a career. He actually traveled with Roy Rogers and Dale Evans. He took care of Buttermilk and Trigger.
You got to be kidding.
No, I'm not making this up.
Connected.
I'm not making this up. And he told us all these stories, and Dr. Lou and I, we just would be quiet for a change, and we would just listen to him tell these stories. But then I left, and 35, 40 years later, I always thought about that guy, and I tried to find his name, and I couldn't find his name. And so finally, by meeting Wayne, it gave me a chance. Who was the guy that worked for you that had a background of taking care of Buttermilk and Trigger? And so he told me the name. So then I looked it up and figured it out. Of course, he had passed away by that time. But it turned out his son, though, had become the most famous trainer of horses used for movies.
Huh.
Yeah, like Ben-Hur and stuff like that. Apparently, he trained all the horses and things. So, it's fun to make circles. So a lot of this conversation is going in a circle.
It's great, Tom. Your life is fantastic. Yeah. We're enjoying it.
Yeah.
So what's the future hold for you now?
Well, it's I still my body's falling apart a little bit. Steve can appreciate that. Maybe a little bit of arthritis here and there, but I still enjoy biking and I love hiking now. And I still want to do still have some equine projects to finish up. We talked about Joy Tomlin's with the hepatitis C-like virus. I'm still trying to help a little bit on that. As a matter of fact, I'm going to look at a horse here in Kentucky here probably tomorrow that we actually treated for the virus, and is doing some nice stallion. It's doing really, really, really well. I'm pleased with that. And so I like to finish up a few of those things. I still have a couple publications I like to finish. I still enjoy when the residents ask me to consult on a case and kind of hanging out with them and so forth. And so, I'll probably keep doing a little bit of this work for as long as I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah.
And I've always enjoyed it 100% so far. But I do want to because I am getting a little older. Steve and I are almost identical age. And, I want to take some time, like this fall, because of this meeting and beaver and so forth. I didn't get a chance to go up the Adirondacks and hike. And that was an experience I really like. So I'd like to cut back some more so I can do some of these things before I fade away too quickly.
Well, it's good to hear that you're still staying connected with the research, though, and we very much appreciate all that you've done.
No, it's pleasure to help what little I could.
And we're excited you're connected with the mountains. You can hike up there in lieu of me.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much for being with us today.
It's my pleasure.
Appreciate
it's my pleasure. Thanks for putting up with my stories.
We loved it.
Thank you. That'll do Stall Side for today. Thank you for joining us. Remember to hit that like button. We've been talking with Dr. Tom Divers and his career in research and all the good that he's done for horses.